الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dear friends, welcome to Idea Foundation Forum. As we find consistency, unity, and perfection in the universe, the divine order and the laws of nature working behind the operations of the universe, we also evidently observe such consistency, unity, and perfection permeated in the verses of the Quran. In the verses of the Quran, similar consistency. Ayat 3 and 4 of Surah Al-Mulk shown on the screen claim human inability in finding any inconsistency, disunity, friction, conflict, or imperfection in the creation of the universe. Likewise, there are several verses which claim human inability in producing even a single statement matching any one of the verses of the Quran because of purity of the Quranic revelations from any inconsistency, disunity, or imperfection. Allah made an open challenge, not a challenge, open challenge to the disbelievers of all the ages. No doubt, focus was the non-disbelievers of Medina or Mecca, but this address was universal of all the ages to produce a verse like that of the Quran, which could never be confronted, as we have discussed in lecture 203. Such marvelous consistency and diversity of the Quranic knowledge manifest its divinity and keep its imitation beyond human capacity. Man cannot do it. Thus, consistency of the message is a great characteristic of the Quran being a divine book. Consistency of the Quranic knowledge may be discussed in two dimensions, internal and external. In today's lecture, we will focus on the internal consistency of the Quranic knowledge. So, dear friends, like consistency in the universe and the divine order regulating its operations, consistency of the Quranic knowledge too witnesses the unity of Allah and His exclusive command in every matter of the universe and the mankind, as stated in Ayat 82 of Surah An-Nisa in the words. The words are, then do they not reflect upon the Quran? If it had been from any other than Allah, they would have found within the Quran, much contradictions, much inconsistencies. Since today we are to focus on the internal consistency in the Quranic knowledge, we begin our discussion with consistency of the Quranic knowledge with the continuing prophetic message formally initiated since the prophethood of Hazrat Ibrahim. In its fundamentals, basics, the prophetic message was originally the same in all the divine scriptures, as all of them, including the Quran, were derived from a single mother source, of Ummul Kitab, preserved with Allah. References are shown on the screen. However, its scope and geographic coverage kept on expanding with changing needs of the mankind with the passage of time. This continuity and commonality of the message across the divine religions have been described in several verses of the Quran. Those are shown on the screen. This divine message got its finality and universality for every age with the arrival of the Quran in terms of scope and geographic relevance as revealed in the verses shown on the screen. Besides limitations of scope and geographic relevance of the previous scriptures, their historic appraisal, their historic assessment, appraisal, as we have discussed in previous lecture, shows that they had lost authenticity. Why? Due to loss of their original scripts, or having been corrupted at later times by the vested interests. Read the history. For that, Allah took over protection of the Quran to His own account with Himself. Several verses of the Quran have revealed set discrepancies of the previous scriptures, confirming and further explaining the divinity of their message of the previous scriptures. The Quran also made corrections of several errors of previous scriptures, and these corrections subsequently proved consistent with the data collected from various archaeological, geological, ecological, physiological, and such other surveys and experimentations. Thus, all such consistencies in the Quranic knowledge speak loud of its divinity. Let me share a few verses on the screen in this context. Please, you must read these verses at some leisure time, spare time. So, dear friends, at his birth, the man was accorded with status of vicegerent on the earth with free will. Man was given free will, free personality, the discretion, and a lot of command over the resources of the universe. Adorned with these features, accomplished with these features, he was landed on the earth with a well-defined purpose. Not just he was sent from the paradise to the earth. He was landed on earth with a well-defined purpose. What was the purpose? To establish a just, peaceful, and materially as well as intellectually growing society, progressive society, ensuring two things: complete submission to Allah's will and well-being of humanity. So, shortly speaking, submission to Allah's will and well-being of humanity, these are the two wings, two parts, two segments of the purpose of man's creation. We have been discussing the purpose of man's creation in our previous lectures. Performance of this purpose of creation in this world. Note, focus. Performance of this purpose of creation. What is the purpose of creation? Submission to the will of Allah and well-being of humanity. So, performance of this purpose in this world was made to serve as detriment of the man's status in the life of hereafter. Thus, life here is a brief period of test and trial. In other words, our performance for the allotment of our status in the next world will be determined on the basis of our performance against this purpose of creation. For this, several Quranic references have been shown on the screen. Do study them. To implement this grand divine plan of the man's creation, the Quran has revealed a perfectly well netted and consistent philosophy of life for establishing a faithful society that may ensure justice, equity, equality, peace, progress, and freedom for the common good of mankind, focusing blessed life in the hereafter to seek the reward of the hereafter. For having insight of consistency of this grand divine plan laid down in the Quran, I may suggest study of a few verses referred on the screen. So, my dear friends, the purpose of man's creation, as we discussed, has two broad segments. One is faith in the oneness of Allah and submission to His exclusive authority. And other is welfare and progress of mankind. Two things. Welfare and progress of mankind. The Quranic knowledge is focused on these two segments, while all the rest is framework to implement this purpose. Ibadat are pillars of Islam, namely proclamation of faith, prayers, fasting, zakat and hajj. 5 are the core of this implementation plan. Focus on each sentence. Ibadat are to build two strong pillars of faith and good deeds. What is good deeds? Good conduct, good character. And they must stand. These pillars of faith and pillar of good deeds, they must stand as bridge. What is bridge? Reciprocating between the two. It means ibadat must play a role of bridge between the faith and good deeds. They must play. They means ibadat. They must play catalytic role. They must play catalytic role in evolving a human character essentially required to build a faithful society for the welfare and progress of the mankind. Now listen very, very attentively, carefully. If our ibadat fail to build faithful and humanitarian characters, they are surely purposeless, misplaced, empty, and thus lost. The Quran, sporting the piety-based criteria of character, rejects Jewish false dogma of being a chosen community. Ayat are shown on the screen. I will invite you to study deeply two small surahs, At-Teen and Al-Asr, which beautifully and precisely summarize the roadmap for the success of man in this world and his salvation in the hereafter. With this perspective, I will request to go through the Quran thoroughly and minutely. You will find the grand plan of the man's creation and a definite framework to implement it consistently laid down for evolving an effective human character suitable to build the desired faithful society, ensuring justice, peace, unity, freedom, equality, and prosperity globally for the whole mankind. Thus, the theme comprising of the said grand plan and idea of universal faith and welfare precisely and persistently permeated throughout the Quran is evident, is witness, and unchallengeable manifestation of its divinity. So, dear friends, when the man was landed on the earth after forgiveness of sin in the paradise, he was immensely empowered with status of vicegerency, personality with personal discretion, resources of the universe, divine guidance asking him to stay faithful to Allah and progressive to the benefit of his fellow beings so that scale of his reward in the hereafter could be justly determined. Thus, an equalitarian, just, orderly, and progressive way of life was decided for the man. What was the way of life? Equalitarian, justice, orderly, and progressive. Whereas corrupted biblical versions of Trinity and eternal sin. Let me repeat the words. Trinity, claiming three gods, and eternal sin snatched away human privilege of free personality, man's progressive and dynamic outlook, and his egalitarian profile in socio-political and economic makeup of society. Note the Quranic references shown on the screen. Such Christian views led to determinism, materialism, and despotism. It robbed, snatched away, torn off, it robbed dignity of the man, his right of equality, and progress, and pushed him to the elitist subjugation and exploitation grossly and indefensibly. Quranic view of man's empowerment, free will, progressive profile, and accountability-based system of reward and punishment constantly presents a philosophy of human life consistent with human nature and the laws of nature, protecting his God-given rights of equality, justice, peace, and progress. So, my dear friends, the Quran, with its divine wisdom, maintains consistency between the free will of man and fixed destiny of the laws of nature by defining domains of the two. The doubts of inconsistency among two are in fact based on lack of Quranic knowledge. The man's freedom of action and thought is definite, as the laws of nature are definite. Such preserved discretion of the man justifies his accountability on the day of judgment, and definiteness of the laws of nature endows the divine order, ensuring sustainability to the universal system. Both are important. Sometimes we feel unusual variations to our known knowledge of the universe and laws of nature. Such confusions are due to our intellectual limitations. There are several such instances where the man felt perturbed, disturbed on certain Quranic revelations, but subsequently found him satisfied knowing the truth with intellectual evolution, intellectual growth, gaining the knowledge. For detailed study, some verses referred on the screen may be consulted on this context. So, dear friends, as we discussed earlier, faith in the oneness of Allah with His exclusive authority and welfare of humanity have made balancing twins in the purpose of man's creation. The second part, the part of welfare and progress of humanity, so the second part refers to significance of this worldly life which has been revealed in the Quran many times, as it provides the man an opportunity to prove his worth for a more privileged life in the hereafter. By making worldly life an opportunity of test and trial to seek better life in the hereafter, man's life is made meaningful. Ayat 77 of Surah Al-Qasas very precisely reveals this consistency in thought-provoking words. Listen. But seek through that which Allah has given you here in this world, the home of the hereafter. Now focus on the words. And yet, do not forget your share of the world. And do good as Allah has done good to you. Follow the tradition of Allah. And desire not corruption in the land. Indeed, Allah does not like corrupters. So, dear friends, the Quran is also consistent with human nature. Allah has made it easy to remember by heart. Quran. The Quran is the only book in the history of mankind which is being persistently remembered and recited word by word by billions of Muslims since its revelation. Besides that, the Quran recorded multitude of subjects giving details of the universe and human life revealed in a long span of 23 years without sport of the memory chip of modern age. Memory chip of the modern age. Yet, it internally holds perfect coherence in its dialect, diction, and contents that let none of the adversaries of Islam point out any inconsistency in the Quranic verses. Allahu Akbar. For such consistencies, the Quran itself was offered as Allah's miracle, and non-believers of its divinity were given challenge to bring equal of a few Quranic verses, to which they could neither respond in the past nor they would be able to do so in future. So, being interpretation of the grand plan of human creation devised by Allah, there remains absolutely no doubt on the Quranic divinity and its originality. So, dear friends, since the Quranic philosophy of life based on principles of equity, equality, justice, and progress is for the whole mankind, the Quran is consistent in applying this philosophy to men and women equally. Ancient religions and even modern philosophies have been considering women in the secondary role. This mindset has been proven by the Western cultures even in the recent past. The Quran took the lead, took the precedence lead role against this exploitation and placed women equal to men in all respects about 1500 years ago. Some verses are misinterpreted, are misused without giving proper perspective to underline the widely held Quranic vision revealed in several verses. Of them, even one verse, Ayat 35 of Surah Al-Ahzab will be sufficient to understand the spirit of this vision. Please have a look on the screen. So, dear friends, before we conclude, let me re-emphasize that the pervasive consistency in the Quran, as we have discussed, in fact, witnesses universal consistency, unity, and exclusivity of Allah's command and His divine order. Allah has elaborated this fact very precisely and logically in the Quran. Let me repeat Ayat 82 of Surah An-Nisa I referred earlier. Will they not then try to understand this Quran? Will they not then try to understand this Quran? If it were from other than Allah, they would have found in it much contradictions, inconsistencies. With this, we conclude our discussion. For reference, today's lecture number is 207. Please subscribe Idea Foundation YouTube channel to watch videos of previous lectures. Their written versions are also available at website www.ideafoundation.com.pk. Thank you, friends, for participation. Allah Hafiz.